She shocked everyone when she walked in with the CEO's secret twins. His cruel plan had just backfired. The crystal chandelier cast diamond patterns across the mahogany conference table where 5 cameras captured every angle of Dorian Cade's boardroom. The champagne cart gleamed beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Skyline, each bottle worth more than most people's monthly rent. Board members adjusted their ties and checked their phones one final time as production assistants made last-minute lighting adjustments. This wasn't just any corporate meeting. This was supposed to be Dorian's crowning moment, broadcast live to shareholders across 3 continents. "No surprises today," Dorian commanded, his voice cutting through the pre-meeting chatter like a blade through silk. His steel grey suit cost $40,000, tailored to perfection, every thread calculated to project power and control. The Cade Industries logo glowed behind him on the smart wall, a testament to the empire he'd built from his father's ashes. "We're announcing the Singapore merger, the quarterly projections, and nothing else. Is everyone clear?" Tamsin Harper, his chief operating officer, nodded while reviewing her tablet. Her burgundy dress matched the company's accent colors. Even wardrobe choices served the brand. Beside her, Sienna Walsh from Public Relations checked the teleprompter one more time, her fingers dancing nervously across her phone screen. Harrison Cordell, the chief financial officer, simply smiled that shark-like grin he'd perfected over 20 years of corporate warfare. The elevator's soft ping shouldn't have mattered. Another latecomer, probably someone from legal or accounting trying to sneak in before the broadcast went live. But something about that particular sound made Dorian's shoulders tense. A primal recognition his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then she walked in. Lilith Arden commanded attention without trying, her emerald dress flowing, like water, as she maneuvered a double stroller through the boardroom doors. 2 babies, barely 8 months old, gazed at the room with curious eyes. One set grey like storm clouds, the other green like spring forests. The boy had a distinctive fox-shaped birthmark on his left temple. The girl's hair curled in perfect spirals, defying gravity and genetics alike. The boardroom transformed into a vacuum. Breathing stopped. Time crystallized. The cameraman's hand trembled, causing the live feed to wobble slightly. 20 million viewers watching the stream witnessed the exact moment Dorian Cade's carefully constructed world began its spectacular collapse. Lilith, her name escaped his lips like a prayer he'd forgotten he knew. His knuckles went white against the conference table's edge, the only thing keeping him upright as recognition crashed over him in waves. She moved with deliberate grace, parking the stroller where everyone could see. The babies cooed softly, unaware they'd just become the center of a corporate hurricane. Rowan reached for his sister Mira's hand, their fingers intertwining, with the natural ease of twins who'd shared space since conception. "Hello, Dorian." Lilith's voice carried across the silent room like thunder, wrapped in velvet. "I received your memo about today's announcement. Something about strategic partnerships and future investments. I thought your shareholders might appreciate meeting their youngest stakeholders." Tamsin's tablet clattered onto the table. Sienna's perfectly composed media face cracked like porcelain under pressure. Harrison Cordell, for possibly the first time in his career, had nothing clever to say. He simply stared, calculating variables that refused to add up to any scenario he'd prepared for. "You can't," Dorian started, then stopped. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. Every word mattered now, each syllable a potential weapon or shield. "Can't what?" Lilith lifted Rowan from the stroller, his tiny fingers immediately reaching for the lights above. "Can't interrupt your perfectly choreographed presentation? Can't refuse to hide in the shadows while you play Empire? Can't decide that our children deserve more than being your best-kept secret?" The word children hit the room like a detonation. Board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The live chat on the stream exploded with speculation and shock. Dorian's empire, built on image and control, suddenly balanced on the edge of an 8-month-old's giggle. You asked me to be your secret, Lilith continued, her voice steady as bedrock while chaos swirled around her. To raise them quietly upstate while you maintained your bachelor CEO persona. To sign papers that would keep us comfortable but invisible. I declined. She shifted Rowan to her hip with practiced ease. They have a right to be known, to know you, to exist in your world, not just in its margins. Dorian's legs finally moved, carrying him around the table with steps that felt both endless and instant. He stopped 3 feet from her, from them, his eyes locked on the boy's face. That birthmark. His mother had one exactly like it, and had always called it their family's fox marking. The girl's curls matched his sister's baby pictures perfectly, the ones he kept hidden in his desk drawer. There, his voice cracked, 38 years of practiced composure shattering in 2 syllables. They're mine? The question hung in the air, like a challenge to fate itself. Lilith didn't answer with words. She simply turned Rowan to face his father fully. The boy's grey eyes met Dorian's identical ones, and the truth became undeniable. The fox birthmark seemed to glow under the boardroom lights, a genetic signature that no DNA test could make clearer. 15 months ago you said you loved me. Lilith's words cut through the silence. 12 months ago you said your image couldn't survive a family. 9 months ago you chose the image. Today, I'm giving you a different choice. The cameras captured everything. The tremor in Dorian's hand as he reached toward his son, the tears Tamsin tried to hide, the way Sienna's fingers flew across her phone trying to manage a crisis that had no management protocol. But mostly, they captured the moment when carefully constructed facades met unfiltered truth. This wasn't just a scandal breaking. This was an earthquake, reshaping the entire landscape, with aftershocks that would transform everything. They thought they knew about power, success, and what really mattered when the cameras stopped rolling. If this moment has you locked in, hit like and comment truth over image, so YouTube pushes this lesson to more people. You're watching Mr. Steele Rich Stories. Subscribe now, where decisions define destinies. 15 months before that boardroom confrontation, Dorian Cade stood at the Metropolitan Museum's arts benefit, watching donors compete over who could write the largest check. He'd already pledged $2 million, enough to secure his name on a wing, enough to maintain his reputation as Manhattan's most eligible bachelor philanthropist. The orchestra played Mozart, while society's elite pretended they understood the nuances of each movement. That's when he saw her. Lilith Arden wasn't trying to network. She stood before a forgotten Monet in a side gallery, truly looking at it, not just posing for photographers. Her midnight blue dress was simple, probably cost less than the champagne being served, but she wore it like armor made of starlight. When she tilted her head to study the painting's brushstrokes, something in Dorian's chest shifted, a tectonic plate he didn't know existed. You're actually seeing it, he said, approaching with none of his usual calculated charm. Everyone else just takes selfies with it. She didn't turn immediately, finishing her observation first. The light, she finally said. He painted the light between things, not just the things themselves. Most people miss that. They see water lilies, not the space where breath lives. For the first time in 5 years, Dorian forgot to check his phone for market updates. They talked until the museum guards politely suggested they leave. Not about mergers or stock prices, but about the sound rain makes on different surfaces, about whether breakfast foods at dinner meant rebellion or comfort, about why certain books felt like coming home. I should warn you, Lilith said, as they stood on the museum steps at midnight. I don't fit into neat categories. I run a small gallery downtown, live in a walk-up with temperamental plumbing, and believe success means creating something beautiful, not just profitable. I should warn you back, Dorian replied, surprising himself with honesty. I've been performing the role of Dorian Cade so long, I sometimes forget there's someone real underneath. She studied him then, those green eyes seeing through his expensive suit to something raw. Then maybe you need someone who refuses to watch the performance. Their first real date wasn't at a 5-star restaurant, but at a farmer's market in Brooklyn. Dorian, who hadn't taken public transportation in a decade, found himself on the subway holding a bag of heirloom tomatoes while Lilith explained the difference between varieties. She taught him to smell basil properly, to select peaches by touch rather than appearance. When she laughed at his attempt to haggle with a honey vendor, the sound rearranged something fundamental in his DNA. "You're different here," she observed, watching him bite into a strawberry with genuine pleasure. Less statue, more human. They developed rituals no one would expect from a billionaire and an artist. Tuesday lunches at a hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese place where the owner knew Lilith's order by heart. Weekend walks through parts of the city that never made it into tourism guides. She'd leave sketches on his desk, not romantic drawings, but observations, his hand holding a coffee cup, the curve of his shoulder when he was truly relaxed, moments when he forgot to perform. "You know what I love about you?" she said one evening, 3 months in, as they sat on her fire escape watching the city settle into night. "You're two different people, but I can see them both. The question is, which one do you want to be?" The pressure started subtly. Board meetings where someone would mention Dorian's bachelor lifestyle as a company asset. Tamsin. Forwarding articles about how married CEOs were perceived versus single ones, with statistics about stock prices correlating with personal stability. Sienna, crafting press releases that emphasized his availability, his freedom, his untethered success. "The Singapore merger depends on image," Harrison Cordell mentioned during a strategy session 6 months into Dorian and Lilith's relationship. "The Lim family values tradition, but they also respect power. A family man seems stable, but a bachelor is hungry, ambitious, undistracted." The word undistracted lodged in Dorian's mind like a splinter. "She makes you soft," Tamsin said one day, not unkindly but with corporate precision. "I saw you check your phone during the Beijing presentation. You actually smiled during a hostile takeover discussion. The board notices these things." Dorian's two worlds existed in parallel dimensions. With Lilith, he discovered he could spend 3 hours in a used bookstore and call it productive. He learned to cook badly, but with enthusiasm. He found himself caring about things beyond quarterly reports, the way morning light moved across her face, how she hummed while arranging flowers, the fierce way she protected her gallery's young artists. But at Cade Industries, he maintained the facade, the eternal bachelor, the untouchable empire builder, the man who needed nothing and no one beyond the next deal. 8 months in, the tension became unbearable. The board formally requested he stabilize his image one way or another. Sienna presented a 12-month publicity plan that featured him with a rotating cast of appropriate women, models, heiresses, people who photographed well and said nothing substantial. Tamsin's family brand company offered a partnership worth billions, contingent on Dorian maintaining his independent lifestyle. "I have a solution," Dorian told Lilith that night, pulling out a contract his lawyers had drafted. 6 months. "You stay private for 6 months while I close these deals, and then we can go public. You'll be protected, provided for. There's a house upstate, beautiful studio space for your art, everything you need." Lilith read every word of the 20-page document. Clauses about public appearances, social media restrictions, communication limitations. A generous monthly allowance that felt like a salary for invisibility. Her name was reduced to Party B throughout. "This isn't protection," she said quietly, setting the papers down with deliberate care. "This is erasure. It's temporary. Just until when? Until the next deal? The next merger? There will always be another reason to keep me in the shadows." She stood, moving to her window that overlooked a small park where children played. "I'm not a distraction, Dorian. I'm not a liability to manage or a secret to keep. I need the sky. I need to exist fully, not in the margins you designate. I'm trying to protect us both." "No. You're trying to protect your image. There's a difference." She left that night. Not dramatically, not with thrown objects or shouted accusations. She simply packed her essential things and drove north, leaving behind a note. When you're ready to be one person instead of two, you know where to find me. But I won't wait in a cage, no matter how golden. Dorian threw himself into work, convincing himself her departure was temporary. The Singapore merger proceeded. Stock prices soared. The board praised his renewed focus. Meanwhile, Lilith found a small coastal town in Connecticut where the lighthouse still functioned, and galleries meant more than commerce. She rented a cottage with windows facing the water, opened a tiny gallery that showcased local artists, and tried to rebuild herself from the parts that Dorian had rearranged. 3 weeks after arriving, morning sickness confirmed what she'd suspected. The doctor's ultrasound revealed more. 2 heartbeats, 2 futures, 2 reasons everything had just become infinitely more complex. She didn't call Dorian. Not when she spent nights researching twin pregnancies. Not when she converted her studio into a nursery. Not when her belly grew round with promises she'd have to keep alone. The birth came during a November storm. The hospital lights flickered as Mira arrived first, screaming her presence into the world. Rowan followed 12 minutes later, quieter but somehow more intense, his grey eyes already seeing too much. As Lilith held them both, rain lashing against the windows, she felt like a lighthouse keeper standing guard between the storm and something precious. She named them without him, raised them without him, built a life that was complete without him, until the day she saw his merger announcement and decided that some secrets were too heavy to carry alone. Her children deserved to exist in full light, not in the shadows of someone else's fear. The stakes had always been clear: keep your name and self, or trade them, for a polished story that would eventually suffocate everyone it touched. The penthouse apartment on the 62nd floor had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. Dorian Cade's Sky Palace, they'd called it, celebrating its museum-quality emptiness. White marble stretched across 3,000 square feet, broken only by black leather furniture that no one ever sat in. The kitchen gleamed with appliances that had never cooked a meal. The refrigerator contained only bottled water and a single container of expired yogurt, a ghost from the last time Lilith had stayed over. Dorian stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows at 3 a.m., watching the city sleep below. He'd been rehearsing for 6 hours straight, not for the merger announcement, but for something else entirely. The velvet ring box sat on his glass coffee table, containing a diamond so perfect it looked fake. 4 carats. Flawless clarity, the kind of ring that would photograph beautifully in press releases. Tamsin. He practiced his reflection in the window. We've built something remarkable together. Our partnership has generated billions in value. It makes sense to formalize what already exists. The words tasted like ash. He tried again, attempting warmth he didn't feel. You understand this world, understand me. We could be efficient together. The proposal wasn't about love. They both knew that. Tamsin Harper came from old money, understood the game, would never leave sketches on his desk or teach him about tomatoes. She'd never make him forget to check his phone during meetings. She was safe, strategic, and suitable. The board had practically scripted their union themselves. His phone buzzed with another message from Quinn Reeves, his personal attorney, merger docs ready. Proposal plan confirmed for after announcement. Tamsin expects it. Don't overthink. But Dorian saw something else in Quinn's carefully worded texts, the exit strategies hidden between lines. The prenuptials already drafted, the dissolution clauses built into a marriage that hadn't even begun. Quinn knew this was theatre, and had seen Dorian practice his lines like an actor preparing for a role he'd never wanted. This is for the company, Dorian told himself, the mantra he'd repeated since Lilith left. Thousands of employees depend on stability. Their families need security. Personal happiness is a luxury leaders can't afford. The surveillance footage from his lobby played on his tablet. He'd watched it 43 times this month. The same clip. Lilith leaving 11 months ago, one small suitcase, no backward glance. He'd had his security team track her initially, knew about the Connecticut town, the cottage, the gallery. But he'd never followed, never called. Pride and fear built walls higher than any contract. At Cade Industries, his performance remained flawless. He arrived at 5 a.m., left after midnight, filled every moment with meetings, calls, and strategic planning. But people noticed the cracks. Sienna watched him flinch whenever photographers appeared, his smile becoming more mechanical with each flash. During video conferences, she caught him staring at nothing, present but absent, successful but hollow. "You're disappearing," she'd said once, after everyone else had left the conference room. Not all at once, but in pieces. Like you're editing yourself out of your own life. Dorian had responded with quarterly projections, changing the subject to safer ground. Numbers didn't ask questions. Spreadsheets didn't require emotional honesty. The night before the announcement, he stood in his empty apartment again, practicing the proposal one final time. The ring caught the city lights, throwing rainbows across his pristine walls. He thought about Lilith's cottage by the water, wondered if she watched sunrises now, if she still hummed while arranging flowers. He didn't know about the 2 cribs assembled by her own hands, the midnight feeding she managed. Alone, the way she sang Rowan to sleep when his grey eyes stayed too alert, too knowing. "This is the right choice," he said to his reflection, trying to believe it. "This is what success looks like." The scene shattered back to the present, the boardroom, the cameras, the twins, who'd demolished his carefully constructed fiction with their mere existence. "Perhaps we should move this to a private room," Sienna suggested, her public relations mind spinning through damage control scenarios. "We can pause the broadcast, cite technical difficulties." "No." Lilith's voice cut through the suggestion with surgical precision. "I'm done with closed doors and private arrangements. Your shareholders are watching? Good. Let them see who they're really investing in." Tamsin's composure finally cracked, her voice brittle as winter branches. "This is highly inappropriate. We had an understanding, Dorian. Plans were in place. Plans that didn't include the truth," Lilith interrupted, lifting Mira from the stroller now, both babies in her arms. "I tried to be silent. I tried to distance myself. But my children won't be footnotes in someone else's story." The boardroom held 23 people, but it felt like only 3 existed. Dorian, Lilith, and the truth that hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed or burned. Dorian moved closer, his polished CEO facade crumbling with each step. The cameras captured something viewers had never seen: vulnerability in a man who'd built an empire on invulnerability. He stopped just out of reach, his hands trembling slightly. "I hurt you." The words came out raw, unrehearsed, nothing like the proposal he'd practiced. "I told myself I was protecting the company, protecting you from scrutiny. But I was protecting my fear, my cowardice." He looked at the twins, seeing himself in Rowan's grey eyes, seeing what he'd almost missed entirely. "I chose wrong." Rowan reached out then, his tiny hand grasping at the air between them. Without thinking, Dorian extended his finger, and his son's grip closed around it with surprising strength. The fox's birthmark seemed to pulse with generational memory, his mother's mark. Her father's before that, a line of identity that no contract could erase. Mira made a small sound, blowing tiny bubbles that caught the boardroom lights. Such a simple thing, but it reset the room's entire emotional frequency. These weren't props in a corporate drama. They were children who needed no agenda, carried no pretense, simply existed in their perfect imperfection. The Singapore deal, Harrison Cordell ventured carefully, the merger presentation. "Can wait," Dorian said, not breaking eye contact with his son. "Or proceed without me. For the first time in my life, something matters more than the next acquisition." Tamsin stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is a mistake. The board won't support. Then they'll find another CEO." The words surprised everyone, including Dorian himself. "I've spent 11 months living in a museum of my own making. Empty rooms, perfect surfaces, no life anywhere." He looked at Lilith, really looked at her for the first time since she'd entered. "You asked me once which version of myself I wanted to be. I chose wrong then. I'm trying to choose better now." The live stream comments exploded. Some viewers called him weak, others brave. Stock prices fluctuated wildly, as algorithms tried to process whether this was disaster or revelation. But in the boardroom, something simpler was happening. A man meeting his children for the first time, while the woman he'd failed watched him realize what he'd almost lost forever. "It's not that simple," Lilith said quietly. "You can't just decide now that they fit your timeline. They have routines, needs, a life you know nothing about." "Then teach me." His voice broke slightly on the words. Not in secret, not with contracts or conditions, just teach me. The boardroom held its breath, waiting for her response. The empire Dorian had built suddenly seemed as fragile as the bubbles his daughter blew, beautiful, but temporary, impressive but ultimately hollow without something real at its center. Image versus integrity, comfort versus consequence. The choice that had seemed so clear in his empty penthouse now revealed its true cost, counted in tiny fingers and missed first smiles in a love he'd traded for a success that tasted like nothing at all. The glass conference room adjacent to the main boardroom offered privacy without complete isolation. Through the transparent walls, board members pretended to review documents while stealing glances at the scene unfolding inside. Dorian had carried in 2 chairs and a small table, creating an intimate space within the corporate fortress. The contrast was jarring million-dollar deals visible through one wall, his children's feeding bottles on the table. Lilith settled into her chair with practiced efficiency, positioning both twins for their feeding. She'd packed their bottles with the precision of someone who'd learned to be entirely self-sufficient. The formula was already at perfect temperature, something she'd mastered during countless 3 a.m. feedings alone. 78 degrees, she said, catching Dorian watching intently. Too hot and they refuse it. Too cold and Rowan gets fussy. Mira's more flexible, but she prefers consistency. She adjusted Rowan slightly, his small fingers wrapping around the bottle. Things you would have known if you'd been there. The words weren't accusatory, just factual, which somehow made them harder to hear. Dorian sat forward, studying every movement like he once studied market trends. "Can I?" He gestured toward Mira's bottle. "Support her head more. She likes to feel secure." Lilith guided his hands, the first time they'd touched in almost a year. "There. Feel her settle? That means you're doing it right." Through the glass, Tamsin gathered her belongings with sharp movements, her departure a statement in itself. Sienna typed furiously on her phone, likely crafting 17 different press responses. But inside this temporary nursery within a boardroom, time moved differently. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dorian asked quietly, watching his daughter's eyes flutter closed as she fed. "When you found out about them." Lilith was quiet for a moment, focusing on Rowan's steady breathing. "You asked me to disappear, remember? 6 months of invisibility, renewable at your discretion. I became very good at not existing in your world." She shifted slightly, her green eyes meeting his. "Telling you would have meant contracts, lawyers, NDAs for the ultrasound technician. I couldn't raise children in that kind of shadow." "I would have." "What? Is hiding them better? Provided a bigger house with higher walls? You weren't ready to be a father, Dorian. You were barely ready to be yourself." The truth of it sat between them, undeniable. Through the glass, Harrison Cordell paced, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calculating stock implications down to the penny. The Singapore representatives were calling. The board was panicking. An empire was shaking. "I want a paternity test," Dorian said suddenly. "Not because I doubt you. Because when the lawyers come, and they will come, I want no ambiguity. These are my children. That needs to be legally undeniable." Lilith nodded, appreciating the pragmatism even in this emotional moment. "I have their birth certificates in my bag. Your name isn't on them yet. That felt like a choice you should make consciously, not one I should force." Before Dorian could respond, the door burst open. Harrison Cordell entered like a storm system, his face flushed with barely contained panic. "We need damage control immediately. I've got Singapore threatening to pull out, 3 board members demanding an emergency meeting, and the stock has dropped 12% in 30 minutes. "Good," Dorian said calmly, not looking up from Mira's peaceful face. Maybe at 12% down we'll remember we're humans running a company, not algorithms maximizing profit. This isn't a joke. Your fiduciary duty. My duty, Dorian interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire, starts with accountability. We'll address the shareholders within the hour. Full transparency. Full transparency? Harrison's voice pitched higher. You want to admit you've hidden children? That you've been living a lie? I want to admit I'm a father who failed to show up. That I chose image over integrity. That starts today, that changes. He stood carefully, still holding Mira with surprising steadiness for a beginner. We built Cade Industries on innovation and adaptation. We innovated something beyond profit margins. Sienna appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. The press wants a statement. The narrative is already spinning secret families, hidden babies, corporate deception. We need to control it. No. Dorian's response was immediate. We don't control it. We don't spin it. We tell the truth and accept the consequences. He looked at Lilith. That is, if you're willing to be part of any statement. This is your story too. Lilith stood, Rowan drowsy in her arms. I won't do press tours or staged family photos, but I'll agree to basic facts. You're their father. We're co-parenting. The rest is private. Co-parenting, Harrison repeated, like the word was foreign. The legal implications will be handled by family court, not corporate lawyers. Dorian cut him off. I won't treat my children like subsidiaries to be managed. They're not press releases or brand extensions. The room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of the twins breathing. Through the glass walls, the boardroom looked like a different universe. One where everything could be quantified, controlled, leveraged. But here, holding his daughter while watching his son sleep, Dorian felt the tectonic shift from theoretical to real. I need the pediatrician's information, he said to Lilith. Their schedules, routines, what they eat, when they sleep. Everything I should already know. Dr. Morrison at Connecticut Children's. They go every month. Rowan had an ear infection last week. He's fine now, but needs a follow-up. Mira's hitting all her milestones early. They nap at 10 and 2, sometimes 3 if Rowan's cranky. Bedtime at 7:30. She paused, watching him mentally catalogue every detail. You can't learn 11 months in 11 minutes. But I can start. He looked around the glass room, seeing it differently. Mondays. Can I have Mondays? Drive up, spend the day, learn their world before asking them to know mine. Mondays. She tested the word, weighing its implications. Not with a convoy of security. Not with photographers documenting your fatherhood performance. Just you, just me. Harrison looked physically pained. The Singapore merger is scheduled for Mondays. The quarterly reviews will happen on Tuesdays. Dorian's tone brooked no argument. Or Sundays. Or whenever it doesn't conflict with teaching my son to walk and my daughter to trust that I'll show up. Through the glass, board members had started gathering their things, recognizing that today's agenda had been permanently derailed. Some looked disgusted, others intrigued, a few almost envious of the man choosing something beyond spreadsheets and stock options. There's something else, Dorian said, gesturing to the main boardroom. That space, the corner by the windows. It becomes a family area, cribs, changing stations, the works. If I'm going to run this company as a father, then this company needs to accommodate that reality. You're talking about converting premium boardroom space into a nursery? Sienna asked, already envisioning the headlines. I'm talking about showing every employee with children that family isn't something you hide to succeed here. It's something you integrate. He looked at Lilith. If you're comfortable with them being here sometimes, your boundaries, your rules. Lilith studied him. This version of Dorian she'd glimpsed before, but never seen fully emerge. We'll see. Trust is built in hours, not declarations. The twins stirred simultaneously, that twin synchronization that defied explanation. Rowan's eyes opened first, grey like his father's, then Mira's followed, green like her mother's. They were awake in a boardroom that had never heard baby sounds before, transforming the space simply by existing in it authentically. Corporate pressure versus human promise. Fiduciary duty versus fatherhood duty. The balance sheet of Dorian's life suddenly had new columns, measuring worth in different currencies entirely. Pause and predict the ending in 7 words. Does Dorian chase the empire or choose family? Comment empire or family with your 7-word prediction. Best take gets pinned and shouted out in the next episode. The media ecosystem devoured the story within hours. Financial networks replayed the boardroom footage on a continuous loop the moment Lilith entered. The twins' faces pixelated for privacy. Dorian's expression when he first held Mira. Business analysts dissected the stock implications while gossip channels speculated about timelines and secrecy. By evening, Icard's secret family trended across 3 continents. Surprisingly, the narrative wasn't universally negative. Sienna had made a single strategic decision that changed everything. She released the footage unedited with a simple statement. Sometimes the most honest business decision is admitting you've been dishonest about what matters. The corporate world split down predictable lines. Traditional investors called it reckless, demanded leadership changes, and threatened shareholder lawsuits. But a younger demographic responded differently. Employees flooded social media with their own stories of hiding parenthood to seem more committed, of missing births for board meetings, of choosing promotions over people. Dorian had accidentally sparked a conversation about what success actually cost. Tamsin Harper released her own statement 48 hours later. No bitterness, no accusations, just elegant clarity. Dorian and I had a professional partnership built on mutual respect and strategic alignment. Recent events have clarified that he needs something I cannot provide, and frankly never wanted to. I wish him genuine happiness, not the performed version we were both settling for. Her Grace made headlines. Within a week, she'd been approached by 3 major companies seeking a CEO with her particular blend of competence and emotional intelligence. The woman who might have been trapped in a strategic marriage instead became the most sought-after executive of the quarter. But inside Cade Industries, the pressure intensified. The Singapore merger hung in precarious balance. 2 board members resigned, citing fundamental disagreements about leadership priorities. Stock prices stabilized but remained volatile, responding to every new development like a heart monitor, tracking an unstable patient. Harrison Cordell called an emergency executive meeting on day 4. The main boardroom where the twins' corner had already been constructed. With surprising speed, now hosted a very different conversation. The family area sat empty, a reminder of everything that had shifted. The numbers don't lie, Harrison began, his presentation highlighting the financial damage in brutal detail. Consumer confidence in our brand has dropped 17% among institutional investors. The Singapore deal is stalled indefinitely. 3 subsidiary contracts are under review. He paused, letting the data speak. The board believes the most responsible action is for Dorian to step aside temporarily. Let someone else stabilize the ship while you manage your personal situation. Around the table, reactions varied. Sienna looked conflicted, understanding both the business logic and the human cost. Quinn Reeves, Dorian's attorney, made notes but said nothing. The remaining board members studied their tablets, avoiding eye contact. "Step aside," Dorian repeated, the words tasting strange in his mouth. For 15 years, Cade Industries had been his identity, his purpose, the empire that justified every sacrifice. "You're asking me to resign." "Temporarily," Harrison clarified. 6 months, maybe a year. Long enough for the storm to pass, for you to establish whatever co-parenting arrangement works, for the markets to forget and refocus on fundamentals. Dorian stood, walking to the windows that overlooked the city he'd conquered. 42 floors below, people moved through their lives, some toward home, others away from it, most trying to balance the impossible mathematics of modern existence. He thought about his empty penthouse, his practiced proposal to Tamsin, the museum life he'd built to house a success that felt increasingly hollow. I agree, he said quietly. The room erupted. Harrison hadn't expected immediate capitulation. Sienna's eyes widened. Quinn's pen stopped mid-note. I'll take a leave of absence, Dorian continued, turning to face them. Effective immediately. Harrison, you'll serve as interim CEO. Sienna, you'll continue managing communications with full authority. Quinn, draft whatever documents protect the company's interests while I'm gone. Dorian Harrison began, clearly unsettled by getting exactly what he'd asked for. But understand this, Dorian interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. I'm not running, I'm not hiding, I'm reordering. He gestured to the family corner, the cribs that had never held his children, the changing table still wrapped in protective plastic. I won't teach Rowan and Mira that power equals love, that success means sacrificing everyone you claim to care about. They deserve better than watching me perform fatherhood between conference calls. He moved back to the table, placing both hands flat on its surface. For 15 years, I measured worth in acquisitions and stock prices. I built something impressive and missed everything important. My mother died while I was closing. The Tokyo deal, did you know that? I got the call and finished the negotiation before flying home because I'd convinced myself that's what responsibility looked like. The confession hung in the air, revealing depths no one had suspected. Sienna's expression softened. Even Harrison looked uncomfortable, recognizing himself in the story. So yes, I'll step aside. Not because the board demands it, but because my children are 8 months old and I've held them twice. Because Lilith managed pregnancy, birth, and months of sleepless nights alone while I rehearsed a proposal to someone I didn't love. Because I have a choice right now that I won't have later. The choice to be present before they're too old to remember I wasn't. Quinn spoke for the first time. The financial implications will be significant, Dorian acknowledged. My personal holdings will take a hit. Probably lose the penthouse, definitely the vacation properties. But I'll still have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. The question isn't whether I can afford this. It's whether I can afford not to. He pulled out his phone, showing a text from Lilith sent that morning. Rowan rolled over for the first time. Mira tried to copy him and got stuck. They're learning they can move. Below it, a video 11 seconds of his children discovering agency, developing personality, becoming people he didn't know. I've missed 8 months of firsts, Dorian said, his voice rough. First smiles, first laughs, first time sleeping through the night. I can't get those back, but I can choose not to miss the next 8 months, or the 8 after that. The boardroom had never been quieter. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. The man who'd built Cade Industries was choosing to temporarily dismantle his role. In it, not out of weakness, but from a strength most of them didn't recognize. There's a botanical garden in Connecticut, Dorian continued, his tone shifting to something almost dreamlike. Lilith mentioned it once. They do children's programs on Tuesday mornings, sensory gardens for babies, teaching them textures and smells. I looked it up last night instead of reviewing the merger documents. He smiled slightly, the expression genuine for perhaps the first time in that boardroom. That's what I'll be doing Tuesday. Learning which flowers Mira reaches for, whether Rowan prefers smooth leaves or rough bark. Building a different kind of foundation. Harrison collected his papers, his expression unreadable. The transition plan will be comprehensive, Dorian assured him. I'm not abandoning the company. I'm trusting the people I hired to do what they're excellent at, while I learn to be excellent at something I've never prioritized. He looked around the table. Some of you have children. How many first steps did you miss? How many bedtime stories got replaced by client dinners? The question landed like an accusation and an invitation simultaneously. Sienna's eyes glistened slightly. She'd missed her daughter's first word for a product launch. Quinn had 3 kids he saw mainly on weekends. I'm taking leave, Dorian concluded. The company will survive my absence. The question I've been avoiding is whether my children would survive my presence, the distracted, resentful version of fatherhood I would have offered while trying to maintain this empire. They deserve better. I want to be better. The meeting adjourned with unprecedented quietness. No debates, no counter-proposals, just the recognition that they'd witnessed something rarer than a successful merger. A man, choosing legacy over reputation, building something at home instead of another floor on a tower that already scraped the sky. As they filed out, Dorian remained at the window, watching the city transform from his kingdom into simply where he used to work. The noise of ambition faded, replaced by a different soundtrack. Tuesday mornings at Botanical Gardens, Monday. Afternoons learning to change diapers, the sound of his own children's laughter that he'd never actually heard. The reputation hit would be substantial. The legacy he might build, that was just the beginning. The first Monday, Dorian arrived at Lilith's cottage at 7 a.m. with a rental car instead of his usual driver. He'd researched essential baby items until midnight, arriving with a diaper bag that weighed more than his laptop case ever had. Lilith watched from the doorway, coffee in hand, as he struggled with the stroller's folding mechanism for 6 frustrating minutes. "The red button first," she finally said, not moving to help. "Then the side lever. They don't make it intuitive." By the 4th Monday, he could collapse and set up the stroller in under 30 seconds. Small victories, but they mattered. He kept a checklist on his phone: bottle preparation, diaper changing steps, the specific way Rowan liked to be burped, how Mira needed her blanket corner to fall asleep. Things that came naturally to Lilith. Through months of necessity, Dorian learned through deliberate study. "You approach fatherhood like a merger negotiation," Lilith observed one afternoon, watching him systematically organize the diaper bag by usage frequency. "It's the only way I know how to learn," he admitted. "Is it wrong?" "It's honest." She handed him a teething ring Mira had dropped. Better methodical presence than charismatic absence. The routine established itself gradually. Mondays became sacred. No phone calls, no emergency meetings, just Dorian showing up at dawn and staying until the twins' bedtime. He learned the rhythm of their days: morning bottle followed by tummy time, mid-morning nap that Rowan fought and Mira surrendered to. Immediately, lunch that ended up everywhere except their mouths. Afternoon. Walks where the lighthouse became their destination marker. By week 6, he'd stopped looking uncomfortable holding them. By week 8, he could anticipate their needs before they cried. By week 10, Lilith caught him singing a lullaby she'd never heard something his mother used to sing, he explained, a melody he'd buried with her 5 years ago. The twins became his teachers in ways no business school could replicate. Mira's favorite word was again, drop a block, pick it up, repeat 17 times until the lesson landed. Persistence wasn't about grand gestures but showing up for the 18th repetition. Rowan was quieter, studying everything with those storm-grey eyes before attempting it, teaching Dorian. That observation preceded action, that patience was a form of intelligence. "Watch this," Lilith said one Monday afternoon. She stacked 3 soft blocks, then waited. Rowan studied the tower for a full minute, before methodically knocking it down, then attempting to rebuild it. "He's a planner. See the whole picture before moving. Like me," Dorian said quietly. "Like you used to be, maybe. Before you confused planning with controlling." The observation stung because it was true. He'd spent years trying to script outcomes, manage variables, and eliminate uncertainty. But babies defied control. They got sick on carefully planned days, refused naps. When schedules demanded them, found joy in chaos and catastrophe in routine. Picture books became Dorian's unexpected expertise. He'd arrive each Monday with new ones, reading to the twins with the same focus he once gave quarterly reports. The very hungry caterpillar taught him about transformation. Goodnight Moon is about the poetry in ordinary endings, where the wild things are about returning home after chasing wildness. "You're learning their language," Lilith said, watching him narrate a wordless picture book with surprising creativity. "They're teaching me a second language," he corrected. "One I forgot. I used to speak." Post-bedtime became their talking time. After the twins finally settled a process that took anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours, Dorian and Lilith would sit on her porch overlooking the water, drinking tea, speaking carefully about everything they'd avoided. "My father raised me like a project," Dorian shared one evening, the lighthouse beam sweeping past in steady intervals. Success was the only acceptable outcome. Emotion was inefficient. "I learned early that vulnerability meant failure. My parents were artists who treated structure like oppression," Lilith responded. "Beautiful chaos. But sometimes I just wanted dinner at a regular time, homework help." That didn't turn into a philosophical discussion about the nature of education. So we're both running from how we were raised, or toward who we want to be. There's a difference. They talked about discipline versus freedom, about which battles mattered with toddlers who were testing every boundary. They disagreed about screen time, found common ground on organic food, laughed about how neither of them had any idea what they were doing. "I'm terrified," Dorian admitted one night, "that I'll revert. That one crisis will pull me back into CEO mode, and I'll forget they need a father, not a manager. Then we'll remind you," Lilith said simply. "That's what CO parenting means, keeping each other honest." The storm arrived in late November, 3 months into their Monday routine. Power outages were rare in Connecticut, but not impossible, and this one hit during dinner preparation. Lilith remained calm with the ease of someone who'd weathered worse, locating flashlights and battery powered lanterns while Dorian held both twins, who'd started fussing at the sudden darkness. "Batteries in the drawer by the sink," she directed, assembling a cold dinner from what didn't need cooking. "This might last hours. There's a casserole from yesterday we can eat cold if necessary." But Dorian had a different idea. He set up the flashlights in a circle, creating a spotlight in the living room. Using shadow puppets, a skill he'd learned from YouTube specifically for this purpose, he transformed the blackout into a circus. His hands became elephants, rabbits, birds, each shadow dancing across the walls while the twins shrieked with delight. Lilith watched from the doorway, seeing something she'd never witnessed. Dorian fully present, completely unself-conscious, finding joy in making his children laugh during an inconvenience that would have once sent him into crisis management mode. When the twins finally exhausted themselves and fell asleep despite the unusual circumstances, Lilith and Dorian sat in the flashlight-dimmed living room, the silence comfortable in ways it hadn't been months ago. "You're different," she said quietly. "I'm trying to be—" She turned to face him, the lighthouse beam briefly illuminating her expression. "You actually are. This isn't performance. You've learned their middle-of-the-night sounds. You know which cry means hungry versus tired. You folded yourself into their world, instead of demanding they fit into yours." The space between them felt charged with something beyond co-parenting logistics. Dorian reached across the small distance, his hand finding hers in the semi-darkness. "I still love you," he said. "Not the version of you that fit my schedule or made me feel less empty. The one who refused to be hidden, who knew our children deserved better than I was offering, who's been strong enough for 3 people for almost a year." Lilith didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. "Love isn't the question, Dorian. You loved me before and still chose wrong. Then what is the question? Whether you can keep choosing right when it's difficult. When a crisis happens and your instinct is control. When the board calls you back and the empire feels more urgent than bath time." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "I need to know this version of you survives pressure, not just Monday mornings." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, tentative, not a passionate reunion, but careful beginning, acknowledging the distance still between them. It tasted like possibility and caution, like hope wrapped in realistic boundaries. "I'm not ready," Lilith said when they separated, "for this to be simple or solved. You're earning back trust in increments, and we're not there yet." "I know, but you're earning it. That matters." The power returned 2 hours later, sudden brightness after extended dimness. But neither of them moved immediately, sitting instead in the restored light, holding the certainty that some things couldn't be rushed. Not healing, not trust, not the transformation from who you were into who your children needed you to become. The boundaries remained real because the hurt had been real. But between those boundaries, something was rebuilding. Not the relationship they'd had, but something more durable, constructed from honest limitations instead of romantic delusions. Past hurt versus patient repair. Desire versus duty. The mathematics of love rewritten in a language where showing up mattered more than grand gestures. Where again meant another chance. Where planning wasn't about control, but about building something worth the wait. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday, deliberately, Dorian suspected, to conflict with his botanical garden plans with the twins. Harrison Cordell had sent the formal notice with corporate precision. Board vote on leadership continuity and fiduciary responsibility. Translation: they wanted him gone permanently, not just on leave. The virtual conference room displayed 200 faces. Institutional investors, board members, stakeholders who'd built wealth on Cade Industries' relentless growth. Dorian joined Lilith's cottage, the twins napping in the next room, their baby monitor visible in the corner of his screen. He wore a button-down shirt, but no tie, a small rebellion that didn't go unnoticed. Harrison opened with numbers, stock volatility graphs, competitor advantage charts, market share erosion projections. Every metric designed to demonstrate one truth: Dorian's personal choices had damaged shareholder value. The presentation built toward an inevitable conclusion. The board proposes a formal vote, Harrison announced, his face grave with practiced concern, to permanently transition leadership to someone who can prioritize fiduciary duty without personal complications. We have a responsibility to thousands of employees, millions of investors, decades of built reputation. Reputational risk, added Patricia Volkov, the board's longest-serving member, has become untenable. The company's brand is now inseparable from personal scandal. That's not sustainable governance. Dorian listened without interrupting, recognizing the strategy he'd once employed himself: frame the personal as unprofessional, position human needs as corporate liabilities, make the math so stark that emotion looked like irresponsibility. When they finished, he unmuted his microphone. "I'd like to address the stakeholders directly." Harrison's expression tightened, but he couldn't reasonably refuse. Dorian's screen expanded to full view, 200 faces watching the man who'd built their wealth, now potentially destroying it. "You're right about the damage," Dorian began. No preamble or defensiveness. Stock price dropped 19% at the lowest point. The Singapore merger stalled. Still stalled, actually. 3 major clients requested reassessment periods, which is corporate language for shopping our competitors. "By every metric you've seen, I've cost this company significant value." He paused, letting them nod along, confirming their narrative before complicating it. "What you haven't seen is the metric I destroyed long before the stock dipped: my own humanity. For 15 years, I optimized everything: sleep, relationships, meals, for maximum productivity. I dated strategically, socialized transactionally, and treated people like portfolio pieces. I built an empire on efficiency and called it success while becoming less human every quarter." The screens showed shifting expressions, some sympathetic, others impatient, most waiting for the point. "I'm not asking you to excuse my choices. I lied by omission. I hid a relationship, then children, because I convinced myself image protection was risk management. That was wrong, not just morally, strategically wrong. Because companies led by people pretending to be invulnerable don't actually innovate. They optimize what exists instead of creating what's needed." Patricia Volkov unmuted. "This sounds like justification for abandoning leadership." "No. It's accountability for what leadership became under me." Dorian leaned forward, his intensity familiar to anyone who'd watched him negotiate. "I'm affirming my leave of absence, 6 more months minimum. But I'm also proposing something else, a fundamental policy shift." He shared his screen, displaying a document that made Harrison's face go pale. Family Integration Initiative, on-site childcare for all employees. Parental leave extended to 6 months. Paid, regardless of gender. Remote work options that don't penalize career advancement. Performance reviews that value sustainability over constant availability. The virtual room erupted. Questions, objections, cost analyses demanded. Dorian waited for the noise to settle. "This will cost 17 million in year one," he acknowledged. "But we lose 32 million annually to turnover from employees who burn out or leave for family reasons. We've had 3 excellent executives resign in the past year alone because we demanded they choose between competence at work and presence at home. That's not good business. It's short-sighted optimization. And if the shareholders reject this," Harrison asked, his tone sharp, "then you should absolutely vote me out permanently. Because I won't lead a company that repeats my mistakes at scale. I destroyed my own family relationships pursuing success I won't build. Corporate culture that requires everyone else to do the same." The vote was called. Dorian watched the percentages shift in real time. 43% for permanent. Removal, 31% for conditional return, 26% abstaining. Not enough to force him out, but not exactly a mandate either. The company was split, just like the culture he'd created, half believing success required sacrifice, half wondering if there might be another way. "The vote fails," Harrison announced, professional, despite clear disappointment. "Leadership continuity is tabled for reassessment in 6 months. And the Family Integration Initiative?" Dorian pressed. "Requires separate approval. We'll schedule a discussion for next quarter." Which meant it would die in committee, Dorian knew. But he'd planted the seed, made it public record. Someone would water it eventually, even if he wasn't there to see it bloom. The meeting adjourned. Dorian closed his laptop just as Mira's cry came through the baby monitor, awake from her nap, ready for afternoon activities. He climbed the stairs to find both twins standing in their cribs, Rowan studying. Him with those assessing grey eyes, Mira already reaching to be lifted. "Garden day," he told them, changing Mira's diaper with the efficiency he'd finally mastered. "Like we planned. No more meetings." The Botanical Gardens children's area was mostly empty on a Tuesday afternoon. November had thinned the crowds, leaving just a few dedicated parents and nannies braving the cold. Dorian pushed the double stroller through the sensory garden, stopping where Lilith had marked on her hand-drawn map, the texture wall. "Feel this." He guided Rowan's hand to smooth river stones, then to rough tree bark, watching his son's expression shift with each new sensation. Mira grabbed at hanging wind chimes, delighted by sounds she'd created through action. A photographer from a financial blog had somehow tracked him down, waiting by the entrance. "Mr. Cade, comment on today's vote?" Dorian didn't pause in helping Rowan explore moss-covered surfaces. "No comment. I'm working." "This is work?" He looked up then, meeting the camera directly. "This is the only work that matters today. Everything else can wait." The photo that circulated wasn't dramatic, just a former CEO crouched by a garden wall, teaching his son about textures while his daughter giggled at wind chimes. No scandal, no spectacle. It didn't trend on social media or dominate news cycles. But it stuck in ways the boardroom footage hadn't, becoming a quiet reference point for people rethinking their own balances. That evening, Lilith found the photo on her phone. "You could have used that moment. Big statement about priorities, gone viral, rebuilt your image." "I don't want to rebuild my image," Dorian said, bouncing Rowan gently as the boy fought sleep. "I want to build a life that doesn't need an image." She smiled, the expression carrying weight he'd learned to read. Approval earned through consistency, not granted through promises. "You're getting there." The vote had clarified something essential. He couldn't control outcomes anymore, only choices. The board might eventually replace him. The policies might never pass. The company could thrive or stumble without his direct hand. But Rowan would remember the texture wall, Mira would remember wind chime afternoons, and Dorian would remember. Learning that legacy wasn't built in boardrooms, but in moments most people considered too small to measure. Short-term control versus long-term legacy. He'd spent 15 years choosing the former, building an empire that required his constant presence to maintain. Now, he was choosing something harder, building people who'd thrive after his presence, who'd remember him not for what he accumulated, but for how he showed up when showing up cost him everything else. If you'd choose principle over payoff, type principle in the comments. Share this with one person carrying a secret that's too heavy. I'll feature a few of your stories at the start of the next episode. The twins' third birthday arrived on a morning that smelled like ocean salt and birthday cake. Lilith's cottage had expanded over 3 years, not physically, but emotionally, becoming less hers and more theirs. Dorian's clothes hung in the closet beside hers now, his coffee mug claiming permanent residence by the sink, his lullaby voice as familiar to the children as her own. The package arrived by courier mid-morning, wrapped in simple brown paper with Sienna Walsh's handwriting on the return label. Inside, Dorian found a framed photograph he'd never seen before, the boardroom moment from 3 years ago, but not the footage that went viral. This was different, a candid shot taken seconds after Lilith entered, capturing Dorian's face in unguarded shock. No performance, no calculation, just raw human reaction to truth colliding with carefully constructed fiction. The note attached read, "Found this in the archive. Thought you'd want to remember the man you were becoming, not just the one you used to be. The childcare initiative passed last month. 17 companies have already copied it. You started something. Sienna." Dorian stared at the photo, remembering that version of himself, polished, terrified, standing on the edge of transformation without knowing if he'd survived the fall. He'd survived. More than that, he'd learned to live differently. "What's that?" Lilith asked, balancing a tray of cupcakes that Mira and Rowan had helped decorate, meaning they were more frosting than cake. "Evidence," Dorian said, showing her, "that sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the doorway to the best one." That afternoon, after the small birthday celebration with neighborhood friends and the twins crashed hard from sugar and excitement, Dorian found Lilith on the porch. The lighthouse beam swept past in its eternal rhythm, measuring time in rotations instead of quarterly reports. "I have something to ask you," he said, sitting beside her on the weathered bench they'd refinished together last summer. Lilith raised an eyebrow. "If this involves a champagne cart and cameras, the answer is no." He laughed, the sound genuine. No stage, no performance. Just this. He pulled out a simple ring, not the 4-carat diamond he'd purchased for Tamsin, but a custom piece, sea glass from their beach, set in recycled gold, imperfect and beautiful. 3 years ago, I tried to hide you to protect my image. I'm asking now, will you help me build a life where we don't need protection? From truth? Where do the kids see parents who chose each other daily, not just once in a scripted moment? "That's not really a proposal," Lilith observed, but her eyes were bright. "You're right." He shifted, getting it right this time. "Lilith Arden, will you build this light with me? Not perfect, not performed, just real and messy and honest." She took the ring, holding it up to catch the late afternoon sun. The sea glass glowed green, the same shade as her eyes, as Mira's eyes, as the ocean on certain mornings. "Yes, but I'm keeping my name. The twins are hyphenating theirs, and if you ever ask me to be smaller so you can look bigger, I'm keeping the cottage. Deal." The kiss tasted like 3 years of earned trust, of boundaries respected and promises kept, of transformation that happened in increments so small they were almost invisible, until you looked back and realized you'd become someone completely different. They announced it simply, a photo on social media showing all 4 of them on the beach, the twins building sandcastles while Dorian and Lilith watched. The caption read, "Building the life we almost lost. No filters, no performance, just gratitude for the backfire that saved us." The response was quieter than the scandal had been, but deeper. People shared their own stories of choosing differently, of backfires that became blessings, of plans that fell apart into something better. The post didn't trend, but it mattered, which Dorian had learned was more important. 6 months later, Dorian returned to Cade Industries. Not as CEO. Harrison had proven capable, and the board had grown comfortable with his steadier leadership. Instead, Dorian took a new role, Chief Culture Officer, a position he'd created specifically to implement the changes he'd proposed. The executive floor looked different now. The corner where he'd once planned to propose to Tamsin had been converted into a full childcare center. Cribs, changing stations, a play area with soft corners and bright colors. Employees brought their children to work without apology, without fear that parenthood signaled decreased commitment. "We've had 12 executives return from companies that poached them," Sienna reported during his first week back. "They said the culture shift was why. We're getting applications from people who turned us down before because they couldn't imagine balancing life here." The parental leave policy had expanded to 8 months, gender neutral and encouraged rather than grudgingly permitted. Performance reviews no longer rewarded constant availability but sustainable excellence. The company had even launched an Arts in Schools funding initiative, Lilith's Influence, channeling profit, toward creativity that wouldn't show immediate ROI, but would matter in ways spreadsheets couldn't measure. "Stock price is up 11% since you left," Harrison mentioned during a strategy meeting. "Turns out companies that treat humans like humans attract better talent and create more loyal customers." Who knew? The sarcasm was gentle, acknowledging they'd all learned something none of them had expected. The backfire that seemed catastrophic had forced evolution the company desperately needed, but would never have chosen voluntarily. Dorian's new office was smaller, with windows that faced the park instead of the skyline. He kept regular hours now. At 8, home by 5, Mondays still reserved for the twins regardless of corporate emergencies. The empire still functioned, still grew, but it no longer required his soul as down payment. The epilogue to their story happened on an ordinary Saturday 4 years after that boardroom moment. The beach near Lilith's cottage, their cottage now, stretched empty in early morning light. Mira and Rowan raced ahead, chasing waves that retreated before they could catch them, learning about pursuit and patience in equal measure. "Remember when you said I needed someone who refused to watch the performance?" Dorian asked, his hand finding Lilith's as they walked. "I remember you thinking you could compartmentalize me. How'd that work out?" "Terribly." "Best failure of my life," Rowan called out, pointing to a shell he'd found, and Dorian jogged ahead to examine it with appropriate seriousness. Mira grabbed Lilith's hand, pulling her toward tide pools where small ecosystems thrived in temporary spaces. "You know what I do now?" Lilith said later, all 4 of them sitting on the beach wrapped in blankets while the sun climbed higher. "At the gallery, people ask how to see art differently. I tell them they already know how. They just forgot because someone convinced them complicated was better than honest." "You're talking about more than art," Dorian observed. "I'm talking about everything. Success, love, family, purpose. We complicate it all, build elaborate plans and perfect images, when the truth is usually simpler and scarier. Show up honestly, choose consistently, build something real instead of something impressive." Mira leaned against Dorian's shoulder, half asleep despite the morning hour. Rowan traced patterns in the sand, creating temporary art that the tide would erase, unconcerned with permanence. They were teaching without knowing they taught, the way children do, showing adults what matters by caring deeply about things that don't translate to profit. The final moral settled over the scene like the lighthouse beam completing. Another rotation. The backfire didn't ruin the plan, it saved them from it. The proposal that never happened would have built a prison disguised as a partnership. The scandal that seemed catastrophic demolished walls that needed destroying. The shame that felt unbearable became the foundation for something authentic. Dorian had planned a perfect moment in a perfect boardroom with perfect control. Lilith had walked in with truth in a double stroller, and demolished perfection into something better, reality. Messy, complicated, honest reality, where love wasn't performed but practiced, where success meant showing up for. People who'd remember you showed up, where the empire mattered less than the hands you held while building it. The twins would grow up with a different blueprint than either parent had received. They'd see a father who chose presence over power, a mother who refused to be diminished, and both parents modeling a simple truth: the life worth living is the one you almost lost but chose to fight for instead. In one sentence, what did this teach you? Drop it below. I pin the sharpest lessons. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories and hit the bell so you never miss a lesson that could change yours. If this hits home, share it and tell me where you're watching from for a city shout out.